how many customers you got that do business with you on a regular basis? He said, oh, probably about 2,000. And I said, okay, out of the 2,000, tell me who the top 7 are. And his wife was sitting there having dinner with me, and she said, well, I can tell you who they are, Miss Coleman. There's this person, this person. And I said, okay, write them down. She wrote them down. I said, let me ask you, if I took away those 7 people right now, how much sales would I take away from you? She said, about 80%. Think about what I just said. 80% of your business comes from those 7 people. And I said, and you're not seeing them every day? Are you nuts? I would have an office in their office if they'd let you. I'd rent an office from them and put an employee in there just sitting there all day long, waiting for anything needs to be done. I said, you got to change that thinking. Service is what business we're in. And I said, and you need to go visit them as the owner at least once a month. Bring donuts, bring something with you, bring gifts. It works because guess why? We're in the people business. We're not in the AI business. AI isn't going to bring you donuts. You understand the principle of that. Now he's in every single major city in Texas. He grew overnight because his reputation became that of they cater to me.
Hi, listeners. Thank you for watching another episode of Revenue Playbook Chronicles. I'm your host, Gene Lytle. I have a special guest today, Ken Coleman. He is from Focus on the 5. Ken, how are you? How have you been? And where are you calling from?
Good, buddy. I'm from Southwest Missouri, a little town called Springfield, Missouri, 3rd largest city in Missouri.
Very nice. Very nice. I remember the last time we spoke that I told you about my grandparents having a small little hotel out there in that area in the Ozarks, and a Holiday Inn came in and shut them down.
Yeah, I get that. Well, that Mr. Holiday Inn was from Springfield, Missouri. A guy by the name of John Q. Hammond's quite the entrepreneur. He built most of the Holiday Inns across the United States. So he was the guy that put you out of business. He's no longer with us, but he was a great philanthropist here in Southwest Missouri.
Oh, so I can't come back and say anything to him then?
No, I was blessed to get to be a realtor for him, and got to fly in the helicopter and do some stuff with him and give him some of my views on real estate investments, because that's a lot of my background. But yeah, he's a great guy, quite the entrepreneur.
Awesome. Now, last time we spoke, I know you have a lot of stories, and I'm not sure exactly where you want to take them today. But what I want to kind of learn today is some of your story, your backstory, where you got started, some of the exciting things that you've done throughout your career, and kind of bring us up to today if you can. Is that fair?
Sounds good. Sure, I can do that. I don't know if very many entrepreneurs are not willing to talk about themselves.
Right.
I'm certainly one of those guys. Yeah. I'm not that I got a lot to brag about. I just like to talk about myself,
Perfect. So what year did it all get started?
I was born in 1957, so that tells you I'm 69 years old. And I grew up during that, right after the Vietnam War. But I was at the very tail end of it. I had 2 older brothers that were big influencers on my life, 6, 7 years older, both of them with 5 degrees, big-time graduates of college on many levels. I started out as really more of a kind of an only kid, being 6 to 7 years older than me. I was the youngest. I was an afterthought, I think. And so my parents both were very committed to working hard in their own careers. My father was the engineer for a little company called Learjet. He was the vice president of Learjet, first Learjet ever built. So he was an entrepreneurial-minded guy. And my mother, both were very focused. So I got passed around a lot in the family. Grandmother babysitted me, my uncle, and so on and so forth. But that was a real blessing for me, because these people were people they chose to be an influence on me, and they were my influencers in my life. So really, I think I was quite blessed that I got that opportunity to be around them a lot. And so that brought God into my life real heavy. Both of them were big into the spiritual side of their journey in life. Neither one of them are with me now, but they were just a major influence on me. So early on, my faith was unmatched. I mean, I was kind of a strange kid because I talked about my faith all the time. And I think, though, that's a key to the direction I went in my life. I always felt like that I had something holding me accountable. And I think that's very important if you're going to be any form of an entrepreneur or anything in life that's going to become something. I think that you have to believe there's a higher power that holds you accountable. And for me, it's not about religion. It's about that. It's about that simple principle. So that happened for me at a young age. And I had a struggle going through school because I was dyslexic, and I didn't know I was dyslexic until 9th grade. So I felt kind of dumb. In fact, in my
Did they have an actual name for it back then?
no, they didn't until ninth grade. In ninth grade, they called it dyslexia. They
Okay.
didn't had difficulty explaining to me what the heck it was. But I remember first grade, the day that Kennedy got shot. I was in class, and I'll never forget that day because it was the day that obviously got shot. But I was also the same day I was standing and reading in class, and I just got through reading something. Teacher said, Ken, what did you just read? And I said, I have no clue. She said, well, read it again. It was a Dick and Jane book. And so I read it again, and she goes, now what did you just read? And I'm standing in front of the class. I said, I have no clue. And I never will forget it. She says, what, are you stupid or what?
Oh
And
no.
I thought to myself, well, maybe I am. I don't know. I feel kind of stupid right now. So I went from first grade till ninth grade with that emotion that I held on to.
Wow.
And I thought, well, maybe there's something there. There is something wrong with me. I didn't know what it was because I knew I wasn't dumb because I could think of things on my own quite well. I was a problem solver, even though I had rough time reading. And I started realizing I could link it to reading was the problem. If a teacher showed it to me, then I got it. But if I had to read it, forget it. And of course, most of education process in those days were based around reading, and you had to read, do homework, come back, and then do the assignment. So, but I got through. Somehow, I managed to graduate high school, and in fact, I went on to college, and I went to 2 semesters of college, and I literally was sitting there one day in one of the classes, and I thought, "Are you kidding me? This is I can't do this. I'm too busy wanting my mind's thinking about how can I go do all these different things." And so I went and got a real estate license, and I went into real estate, and I was the youngest realtor in the state of Missouri. Became rookie of the year my first year in real estate, and I never looked back. I never will forget it that they asked me to get up in front of about 2,000 other realtors that were all much older than me. Most of them were twice my age. And they asked me what was my secret to my success that first year of doing so well. And I told them, I said, well, I just didn't, it wasn't an option for me because college wasn't an option for me. So I knew I had to do well at something. And so I think that was a big help. And I just had some natural ability too. I think there was a little bit of in my DNA to be a communicator. And so I just, I was and I got married too, right out of high school.
Oh,
so
wow.
yeah, I thought, what the heck? Let's get this world going, So I married the high school cheerleader, and she was the captain of the cheerleading squad, and off with life I went, and never looked back. I stayed in real estate. I'm still in real estate. So real estate was a major background for me, and became the entrepreneurial side of me. Basically, went after there, and I became a developer a little later in life, developed a ton of houses, sold and closed over 7,000 properties in my career, 7,000 clients personally in my career, which is a lot for a real estate agent.
Yes.
And that gave me a huge background on the understanding of the nature of how people make choices in life. And I made it a study because in order to produce in the real estate world, I realized that, first of all, 100% of all properties purchased was a woman that actually was making the choice. I didn't
Yes.
figure that out, but I finally figured out that, and that's true of most things in life. Women actually are at the core of almost all choices. That's difficult for a lot of guys' egos, but it's the reality, and it's just what it is. Right. And if a guy's single, which I'm single now, I still get my daughter's opinion, my granddaughter's opinion. I get a female's opinion before I make my choice. I don't care if it's the color of a car I buy. I still want to get their opinion. Yeah. So I learned that lesson early on, and that helped me an awful lot in everything that I did, because one of the things I realized was that, first and foremost, I'm in the people business. I don't care what I'm doing. It wouldn't matter. I'm always back. It always goes back to, and I used to tell my friends and stuff. I had a friend in the insurance industry, graduated high school with, and I had one in the car business, and another one that was in the retail business. And we would compare notes and stuff. And I said, I think I had that same customer you had. And I started realizing they are the same people. They just they do different things in life. And so I realized pretty early age that I was in the people business. So I thought, you know what, I'll learn real estate. Real estate's there, and I'll get that, and I'll just stay at it. But I realized that my primary focus needed to be to understanding the nature of how people make choices in life. Why some people go left when others go right. Why do some people hesitate to make a decision? Why some move forward to make a decision? And so that was something I learned early in my career, and it really helped me to where I would say I had a percentage of about 7 out of every 10 people I worked with, I sold them something. And that was an extremely high percentage. And I knew it was because I could get into their head, into their emotional side, and connect with them. and be genuine about it. And that helped me a great deal. And that's helped me still to this day. It still helps me put deals together and make things happen. But so I was in the real estate business. I was rookie of the year my first year, went on to do extremely well, continued on in the industry, had two kids. Both of them graduated college now. Both of them have marketing degrees. One of them is the head of marketing for a little company called Dell Computers, and the other one owns her own marketing company, and she used to be the head of marketing for XM Radio, and she now has her own marketing company. Very proud of both of them. 5 grandkids, and they all live close to me. So what a gift! God's been great to me, and my faith is still just as much today as it was when I was a kid. It's never wavered, never changed. But I have found that, I worked with retirees. This was interesting. I worked with retirees most of my life. I worked in a market called Branson, Missouri, Table Rock Lake area, which is south of Springfield, and it's a huge retirement area. And about 8 out of 10 people I worked with were retirees. And most of them were highly accomplished retirees because they were buying a second home or a nice home on the lake. And they were from the Midwest area. They were from Dallas, Little Rock, Des Moines, Kansas City, St. Louis, Wichita, Tulsa. And they would come here because we have one of the prettiest lakes in the Midwest, and they would purchase a home. Well, I got the opportunity to get to know them, and I'd interview them. I would sit on their back porch, and I'd have iced tea after they bought their property, and I would sit and get to know, how they made their money, and it was really great. And they and gals, and they came from all walks of life, from all different types of careers, but I started looking for things they had in common. Because remember, I'm in the people business, so I'm thinking I'm going to learn about these people and learn about, is there patterns to these people? Is there especially these overachievers? That's what I call most of them. I found that most of them I worked with were overachievers. And interestingly enough, about 8 out of 10 of them were former military. I live in an area there's more veterans per capita than anywhere else in the United States, and which is a pretty good area to live. The Ozarks is really a beautiful area. But so I tell you a little bit about their values. They believed in God. I started seeing that, wow, there's a pattern here. Some years later, I went and interviewed 12 billionaires, and I was going to write a book. And I thought, from all these lessons that I have learned over the years in the real estate business, and I thought I'd like to give back to people. And I actually had the opportunity to make a connection with God, and I felt like I was asked to write that book. So I wrote a book called Focus on the Five. And the principles behind the book is that 5% of the population is born in their DNA to be overachievers. And the other 95% just doesn't have that drive for whatever reason. Not everybody's a natural born athlete. Not everybody's a natural born singer. Not everybody's a natural born. But roughly 5% of the people I have found in the world, in the universe, and there's no rhyme or reason to this. I mean, there's size, shape, age, where they're born doesn't seem to really matter. It's kind of salt and peppered all over the earth. But that 5% that were born are what built this country. Interestingly enough, I mean, that you look at the guys that wrote the Constitution of the United States, they were all what I call fives. They were all overachievers by their nature. And here's the interesting thing. All but 2 of them believed in God. The other 2 wasn't real sure. But the pattern that I found when I interviewed these 12 billionaires, I decided years later, I'm going to really want to tie down kind of like a lot of books have been written, that have done backgrounds on people who've been highly successful. But I had sold these 12 individuals their own properties, and I knew them pretty well and never asked for a favor from them. So when I called them and asked them if I could interview them, they said, "Sure, Ken, you bet. Absolutely." So I got the opportunity to go sit down with each and every one of them, and they're all billionaires. And so they're very well to do. Most of them are from the Midwest. Would be hard to figure out who most of them are because I live around most of them. I'll tell you who one of them was. I hate to throw names around, but one of them was Les Garland, and Les Garland started MTV and VH1. I sold him a big house on Table Rock Lake. There was one of those buyers that came, and so I got to know him, got to become good friends with him, and he's still kicking. He's I think he's the largest owner of Troon golf courses, stock in Troon golf courses in the United States. Terrific individual, and he endorsed my book. By the way, all 12 of these guys endorsed the book, Focus on the Five. But I interviewed each one of them, and I told him I was going to only ask him 4 questions. And I feel like these 4 questions are very important for your listeners to hear. I really learned, this is valuable stuff that I said, okay, what I want to do is ask you 4 questions. You answer those questions as honest as you can from the heart. And I said, and if that's not too much to ask, no, all of them didn't have any problem with that. So the first one, I sat down with a legal pad and a pen, and I said, okay, if money's not an object, which it's not for you, and I was to ask you, and you were close to the end of your life, and I asked you, what is the most important thing to you in your life? Now, here's what's interesting. All 12 answered this question exactly the same. And the answer was their faith. All 12 of them said it was their faith was number one. And it was Les Garland was the first one I interviewed. He said, well, Kenny goes, and they all said this pretty much exactly the same, is that if I lost everything tomorrow, if my family was to, die in an accident or something, the one thing that I still have that will get me through is my faith. There's nothing else that would do that. Not my money, nothing else will allow me to move on with life. So I hold that most precious to me is my faith. And I thought, man, that's true with me as well. So the second question was, okay, now we know faith is your most important thing. What's the second most important thing to you in your life?
Right.
And you can understand, as a guy who wants to understand how to connect with people of influence, because that's how you move greatly forward in life, is to rub elbows with that group. I said, what's the second most important thing to you in your life? And the answer was, all 12 answered it the same. And you can probably guess what it was. What would you guess?
Family.
Yes, it was. Family was number two. And hands down, it's like no family. Faith first, family second. It was the third one I really wanted to know. I figured I pretty much knew what the first two would be. So the third one says, okay, so now what's the third most important thing to you in your life? I thought this one will vary. It didn't.
Really?
Answered it exactly the same. Three of them said, well, let me think about that a minute, and then started to say something else and came back to this one. And I didn't influence it. I just sat there just listening with pen in hand, ready to write it down. About me after I got to the first six and they all said the same thing. And I thought, what's the odds of the last six saying the same thing? And they did. And it's in the answer is time.
Wow.
Yeah. And that one had occurred to me, but I didn't realize it was. Now, why is it important to know this? Because if you're ever connected with somebody that's very influential or someone who's doing extremely well in life, you better know how to connect with them. You better know where their head's at, where their heart's at. If you can't connect with them in the first few seconds through conversation, then you're going to lose them. So here's what I've learned so far. Talk about their faith, talk about their family, talk about how valuable their time is. Recognize that.
Right.
Because that makes a connection, because you're talking to them then. You're really talking to something they can relate to. So the fourth one's the magic. The fourth one's the one I came here for. And I said, okay, and it was, I'm not going to throw out names, but anyway, a very influential individual. And with the O'Reilly, I'll say it, with the O'Reilly Automotive family. How's that? It's one of the members. And he said, well, Ken, for me, it's hands down. He said, it's relationships. That's the most valuable thing I've got in my life. It's not about airplanes. It's not about houses. It's not about, diamonds. It's not about anything that I've ever purchased. If I'm on my last breath of air on my deathbed, I'm going to be thinking about my faith, number one, family, number two. I have no time left. So time's going to be very valuable to me. And he said, fourth is going to be the relationships that I've built over the years, hands down. And they all 12 said the same thing.
Wow.
All 12 said the same thing to the first four questions. And I thought, that's extremely important for me to be conscious of when I'm talking to someone who's influential. And so before I left, because I'm Ken Coleman and I couldn't resist, I said, I told you four questions. I got to sneak one more in. And they were fine with that. And I said, okay. I said, so I want to know, how did you meet those people? Pretty good question, huh?
Yes.
I said, I want to know, how did you connect with those people? Because I said, obviously you connected with the right people. And I said, I'd like to know how you met them. And all of their answers were the same. All 12 answered it the same way. All of them told me that it was at events, non-for-profit events, is where they met most of the influential people they met in their life.
Wow. So now you're dealing with what they care about, right?
Yeah. So it was one of them who is owner of a big sporting goods company here in the United States. He said, well, Ken, he goes, I was down in Texas one time, and he said there was a lady down in Texas, probably the most successful woman in the history of our country, at least in our generation, at creating non-for-profit events. And he said the funny thing about her is she never worked a job or a day in her life, and she created two presidents.
Interesting.
Her last name's Bush, Barbara Bush. He said she held tons and tons and tons of non-for-profit events. And he said, that's how I met people. I got invited, and I wanted to make sure to get to go to those events. And he said, I met Kevin Costner there. I met a lot of the Wahlbergs. He said the Bushes, and he went on down the list. He said, I met tons of people there. And he said, and those became major connections for me over the years to get things done and manage to do things. And he said, I was just, I just went to that event. Now, Les Garland told me, he said, Ken, my wife, and he says, this is probably true of all the guys you're interviewing. He said, when you have a lot of money, guess what? You get a huge tax break by giving it away, and you get to pick where it goes. He said, so usually there's a person in everybody's family who is that designated person who watches where that money goes. It's usually your spouse, but not always. Could be a son or daughter or brother or sister. He said, but there's somebody that you love and trust. He said, that's spending the largest amount of disposable money you've got to spend. And he said, and they get to pick the different places that it's going to go. Or I might give my thoughts and they'll go there. But he said, but guess who represents our family at all of those events? That person.
Right.
Guess who writes my schedule to make sure I'm at those events?
The same person.
So their most disposable time that they have on this earth is their time. Remember how important that time is to them.
Right.
Is with their family, work, or non-for-profit events. Kind of a bingo moment, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So what did Ken Coleman do at an early age? I'll tell you what I did. I volunteered for non-for-profit events all the time. And guess who I got to know? The people who ran the non-for-profit event. And guess who I got to meet at every single one of those events? Their spouse.
Perfect.
They would walk up and they would introduce me to them. I didn't even have to ask. I didn't have to go find them. And what's cool was that after about 3 or 4 events I showed up to, if I didn't know who they were, they would walk over to me and say, you know, I've seen you at these last 3 or 4 events and I don't know who you are. And they shake my hand. And I'm thinking, holy cow, I can't believe who I'm shaking hands with right now. I'm just old dumb hillbilly from the Ozarks, but I'm shaking hands right now with a billionaire.
Yeah, you actually became a smart feller from the Ozarks is what happened.
Well, yeah. I joke about old dumb hillbilly, but the truth is there's a lot of billionaires right here that are old dumb hillbillies here in the Ozarks. And, you know, Walmart's just not very far from here. And the Walton family, Johnny Morris, who owns Bass Pro, is close to here. And then there's the O'Reilly family that lives close to here. And then there's Tyson Foods, which is another great big huge. A lot of big Fortune 500 companies right here in the Midwest, believe it or not, that guess what? They're faith-based. So it's no surprise that 12 that I interviewed were all faith-based, but I find that that's generally true. And they would explain to me why. You know, it's interesting when you're a risk taker, which typically someone who's going to be relatively successful in life has to be some form of risk taker. They have to be willing to gamble some. Maybe it's very calculated, but still a gamble. Well, if you don't feel like you've got a safety net to catch you if you fall, and that's God for me.
Right.
Then I must likely even take a risk because I have nothing to fall back on. I have no safety net. And I think that was true of all these individuals as well. So I definitely found that those 5 questions were very valuable and invaluable to anybody who's in business. I don't care who you are because you're in the people business first and foremost. It's not what you know, it's who you know.
Right.
So you got to make those connections with people. And it was, I met, Tony Robbins was one of my biggest influencers in my life. He was one of my personal coaches. I went through Tony Robbins seminars. I was a graduate of Tony Robbins seminar. I put my kids both through Tony Robbins seminars. I believe he's a really great coach. I think every human being needs a coach, especially people who are working to be successful in business. And I think it's important to seek out your coaches and whoever they may be, your mentors. For me, Tony Robbins was good because he's made a lifelong study of trying to understand people and the nature of people and how they make their choices and their decisions. So that's what influenced the writing of the book. I have a strong desire to develop. So I developed a lot of stuff in the Branson, Missouri area. I was tied to over 100 developments that I did. I used a lot of creativity. Tell you a simple secret that I did that may be very successful in real estate. And this is one that for a lot of your listeners, they can probably tune into. It's a very simple marketing idea that works for almost any industry. They make a lot of magazines in the world, and now you can go online and get these magazines. But when I was young, I decided to go to contractors and give them good advice. And I knew I wanted to give them something that they didn't have. So I wanted to give them, I wanted to have a secret weapon, what no other realtor had. So I went to Barnes and Noble and I subscribed to every single women's magazine, house magazine that they made. I had those magazines sent to my house, and I had my personal assistant clip out all the pictures in the magazine that related to housing, and whether it be a faucet or a sink or a kind of doors that were being used in the pictures, or didn't matter what it was, and then file them. This is before before the computer was really, before ChatGPT or some of the things that are out there today. But the thing is, you can still do this today, and it's important to do it because knowledge is power, especially to a contractor. And so I would go to the contractor and I'd say, hey, look, I know the number one thing you should be building in your houses. And they look at me kind of funny and say, well, how do you know? Are you a designer or something? I said, no, I know for a fact what is the most important things you should be putting in your houses. They said, well, how do you know? And I told them, I said, I subscribe to all these magazines. I clip out all those pictures, and I know what the number one door is that every woman's looking at in a magazine right now. And if she walks into your house, what door is she going to see?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, well, hopefully the door that you've got, you're going to tell me about. And I said, that's right. So I had 93% of all new home construction in my market. I had 57 contractors exclusively listing with me. I was the number one realtor in the United States for listing new home construction in my market.
Wow.
And the reason was because I brought them something that they didn't have. That was just one thing I brought them. I did other things too. But so it doesn't matter what industry you're in, if you don't provide service, and that's still true today as it's ever been, because guess what business we're in?
People business.
People business.
I was listening.
AI is a great tool, but AI is not what? People.
People.
Yep. People to people. You're never going to replace that. You're just never going to replace that. I was at Verizon yesterday, and I was talking to a salesperson there, and she said, yeah, Mr. Coleman, she said, I know you've been a client for a lot of years. She says, I guess I probably won't have my job very much longer. And I said, why is that? She said, AI is probably going to replace me. And I said, no, I said, that would be a big mistake. I said, because I would not come to Verizon anymore if you're not here. And I said, surely they're smart enough to know that. And she said, I don't know. She said, they're pushing for AI. And I think that's true of a lot of companies right now. And I think that's a very controversial thing, especially people who own companies. But you can't lose sight of the fact that the number one marketing tool on the face of the earth is word of mouth. And AI is not an opinion. AI is a gathering of thoughts. It's not a person who says, yes, this is why I like it. This is why I don't like it. And you know me and trust me and like me. So you value my opinion. I don't know AI. I don't know that I can trust AI or I certainly don't know if I like AI. You know, it's a great information source. Don't get me wrong. I think it serves a great function. But I think that, go back to those 12 billionaires and what was most important to them. If I asked that same question of AI, what would I get?
Who knows?
I wouldn't get those answers, would I?
No.
Because it doesn't have family. And God's not number one on its list. And time, it doesn't care about time. You get my point?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So that connection with people is never going to change, and providing service is never going to change. So no matter what industry you're in, pick apart and think about what is it that my competition's not doing. And service is number one foremost. I've given a lot of advice over the years to companies, and because I'm kind of a marketing minded guy. And I remember I was in Austin, Texas one time, and there was a company down there that was having a rough time going, and he was a printing company, and he had 3 different locations. And he said, Ken, I'm just not growing. I'm not getting any bigger. And I said, so when's the last time you went to see your number one clients in town? He looked at me kind of funny. He said, what do you mean? I said, you haven't. And he goes, well, I just never have time. And I said, well, then you need to shift gears. I said, think about it this way. If you focused only on your top 20% of your customers, got rid of the other 80%, think of how much more focus you could give the top 20%. And he looked at me kind of funny. He said, well, I don't know if I can afford to lose the 80%. I said, you're going to lose them all if you don't focus on that top 20%. I said, that top 20%, that is what's really paying your bills. Mm-hmm. The bottom group, I said, let me ask you this. How many employees can you eliminate if you get rid of the bottom 80%? He said, probably about 80%. And I said, right. So how much does that lower your overhead? He said, quite a bit. I said, how much time does that give you now to be able to go see the customers that really matter? And he said, Jad, you're right. He said, I hadn't thought about it in that perspective. I said, no, because the old way of thinking, the stinking thinking, is to think about, get as many numbers as I can. I said, that's the way internet thinks. Just send you lots of leads. I said, no, you want quality leads. I said, the reality is that other 80% will show up. They'll still buy from me. You want to know why? Because you're number one in town. If you're number one in town, they're going to come to you no matter what. I said, but you need to structure things to where you cater to the 20%. Whatever you do, never lose sight of that. That is your bread and butter. And so we structured things to where I said, so let me ask you this. Do you go around to those top 20% companies and ask for their business every day? He goes, no. I said, why don't you? Who's more important? I said, why should they ever have to come to you or pick up the phone and call you? Why aren't you there waiting on them for business? If they're the top 20%, I said, you could do that with the top 5%. I said, in fact, the more you squeeze that number, I said, and so I asked him, I said, do me a favor. Out of all, I said, how many customers you got that do business with you on a regular basis? He said, oh, probably about 2,000. And I said, okay, out of the 2,000, tell me who the top 7 are. And his wife was sitting there having dinner with me, and she said, oh, I can tell you who they are, Miss Coleman. There's this person, this person. And I said, okay, write them down. She wrote them down. I said, let me ask you, if I took away those 7 people right now, how much sales would I take away from you? She said, About 80%. And I said,
20% does
just
80% of
think about what I just said.
Right.
80% of your business comes from those 7 people. And I said, and you're not seeing them every day? Are you nuts? I said, man, I would have an office in their office if they'd let you. I'd rent an office from them and put an
Right.
employee in there just sitting there all day long, waiting for anything needs to be done. I said, you got to change that thinking. Service is what business we're in. And I said, and you need to go visit them as the owner at least once a month.
Right.
Bring donuts, bring something with you, bring gifts. I said that it works because guess why? We're in the people business. We're not in the AI business. AI isn't going to bring you donuts. I said, but I said it's old, but you understand the principle of that. So he did. Now he's in every single major city in Texas. He grew overnight because his reputation became that of they cater to me. I can't do business with anybody else because he actually has made it easier on me. He picks up the printing stuff and takes it with him and brings it back to me and makes any changes that needs to be made. He does everything for me. I can't afford not to have him.
Right.
And he realized that how important it was. He said, Ken, why doesn't more people understand this and know this? And I said, well, a lot of companies do, but a lot of companies don't. I said, I said, I'm not saying that the 80% is not important, but what I am saying is let your competitor have that 80%. Let them spin their wheels, taking care of them. I said, you can get that top 20%, take them all day long. Those 7. And so he added from that 7, he has 50 customers now that are like those 7. Imagine what it's doing for him. And he moved out of the retail locations into one big wholesale location, the warehouse district, which lowered his overhead, increased his space, lowered the number of employees, increased his profits dramatically. But anyway, it's a simple principle that is probably true of most any business. I don't care what business that you're in. It's working smarter, not harder, and focusing on the people that really matter. That's why I wrote the book, Focus on the 5. It's so the 5%.
Where can you get that book?
Amazon. You can get it at Amazon and Barnes and Noble. But they're I have a sequel coming out to it. It's called Focus on the True 5. And it's this book was so successful that and the 12 billionaires endorsed it. It's got their endorsements in the book. But the sequel book goes in depth as to understanding the nature of 5s. Here's the reality. The more 5s that you can put into your life, those 5%ers, I call them 5s because it's the 5% of the population that are overachievers. I believe they're born in their DNA to be overachievers. I don't think it's an option for them. I think that they have that feeling in the pit of their stomach. They know they're destined to do something greater than themselves. They don't want to sound egotistical as a child, but the reality is they're born with it. It's like a kid that can run real fast, is it egotistical to say he runs real fast? Maybe, but he still runs real fast,
Right.
It's just a reality for him. And I believe that's true of overachievers. Overachievers are born that way. I don't believe they become an overachiever. I really don't. Having that drive, that desire, that burning desire to be somebody, it's just something that there's a little bit of learned part of it too by influencers in your life, and that's in the second book. But I'm going to say the majority of it comes from your DNA, and it can be in any family. It's not necessarily hereditary. It's not necessarily. It just happens, and God just designed it that way. I think on purpose, just kind of sprinkled it around so that there would be, that's why America is what America is today. Is because of those 5s. People say our number one weapon was when those men sat down and wrote that Constitution of the United States. They said, we need to create a set of laws that encourages other guys like us, which were 5s, to come here to this country and live. Because if we can do that, then we'll always be the best inventors. We'll always be the most powerful country in the world. Because you know what they understood? It's not about land. It's not about gold. It's about people. And if we don't write laws and make things structured in such a way to where people that are really smart and that are overachievers want to come there, then that's the number one thing that we can create and do. And they did. And to this day, there's a child being born in China right now that it's going to be very long before that child, he or she is going to say, you know what, there's a country I can go to be the 5 I was born to be.
All right.
And they're going to get here whatever it takes. And you can't blame them. It's like telling kid there's candy at the candy store down the street and you can't go there. I mean, they're going to go. One way
they'll find a way.
By the time they're 16 years old, their behinds headed down to that candy store. And I can tell you, because of the movement of Focus on the 5, I have a online on Facebook, a group called Focus on the 5 that I would love for you to go to. And it's just full of 5s, which is pretty cool. So you can connect with them. And there's no fee or anything. It's just an opportunity to visit with other 5s. And it's Focus on the 5, the number 5, not the word 5.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, fives are, they're everywhere in the world, but there are a high number of them here in the United States. And there always will be because of the nature of what we've designed as a country. And that's a message so if there was messages I'd want to give to your listeners, it's those 5 things that's really important to the 12 billionaires. The other is that if you don't have faith, find it, get it. But let me tell you, if you're a 5, you were born with it. That's the interesting thing. That's one of the reasons why 5s end up being overachievers. Now, some of them do get off track. I mean, there's some that are overachievers that lose their faith. And guess what? When you lose that faith, it's not good because there's no accountability. That makes sense?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So find those people, connect with those people is a strong message that I can't say enough about. Is go find them, and you can go to non-for-profit events in your town. What a great place to hang out.
Right.
At non-for-profit events, and they have the disposable time. That is where they have the time to meet you. They have nothing else to do. They're bored. Their spouse told them they got to go. So there they are sitting there, da 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 da, and pretty soon, they see some guy that's been at the last 3 or 4 events, and they say, well, I'm going to go meet that guy because it's their personality, and they got the time. And next thing you know, you're shaking hands with somebody that really matters. And that I think a lot of us know it, but we lose sight of it because why? We're so busy taking care of that 80% of the customers that don't make us any money.
Right.
So you make some choices in your life to say, okay, how can I manage my time better with my company? I don't care what it is. You can be an insurance salesman, you can be a real estate agent, you can be a computer programmer. It doesn't matter. If your time's not spent doing what your God-given talents are. That's the other thing too. I want to talk about one more thing. Can I add one more thing in there?
Absolutely.
This is a good little nugget. This is one that I felt definitely that God shared with me, and it was life-changing for me. And that is that when I asked God, I said, God, what is my purpose on this earth? Great question to ask God. And I sat there for 6.5 hours with tears rolling down my face at a riverbank, the Red River between Arkansas and Texas, having a conversation with God, which I could not believe I was getting to have, but I was. And I felt so unbelievably blessed. And that's the book, Focus on the 5, came from that 6.5 hours. And I said, God, does religion matter? And he said, no, I don't care about religion. And I said, well, he goes, I want people to believe in me. And I want them to serve me. And I said, well, then how can I best serve you? And I'm telling you, it was a strung out deal. I had to figure it out. He wasn't going to just tell me. I had to figure it out. And finally, I said, well, God, I thank you for everything I can think of. I thank you for my kids. I thank you for all the things I've got in my life. I constantly thank you for. He goes, yeah, but you're not thanking me for the most important thing. And I thought, man, I'm a pretty creative-minded guy. God, did you give me a creative mind? I think I've thought of almost everything. And he said, no, you haven't thought of the most important thing. And I sat there for another hour. And finally, I said, I hit on one. I said, is it God-given talents? He goes, yep. I said, oh, yeah. Thank you for my God-given talents. Never thought about it. Thanking you for that. And he said, well, most people don't. He said, do you know what your God-given talents are, Ken? Now, I didn't have a conversation with God like words back and forth, but it was straight to my brain. And I was having that conversation in my brain just as clear as you and I are talking right now. And I said, well, that's a good question. I have to think about that. What is my God-given talent? I thought about it a while, and I said, well, I don't know. I probably asked my older brother and my mother, and he said, no, you're talking to me. He said, you know what they are. I want you to have that conversation with me. And finally, I figured out what they were. And I told him what my 2 God-given talents were. And he says, okay. He goes, so from now on, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to thank you for those 2 God-given talents. He goes, they're very good. He said, then what? And I said, but how can I best use those God-given talents to serve you? He goes, there you go. Now we're talking. I said, okay, I'm feeling good about this. I said, wow, man. I said, why didn't somebody tell me this years ago? And he said, well, I kind of did. But he goes, people don't read it that way. And I said, okay. I said, well, that's fair. I said, well, so how many? I just have 2 God-given talents? He goes, yes. I gave you 2 arms, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 legs, 2. I gave you 2 God-given talents. He said, everything else is a derivative of those 2 talents. Every human being got 2. I said, interesting. He said, yep. Now, whether your listeners believe what I'm telling you or not, I'm telling you, this happened. This happened. And I'm preaching it from the rooftops. So I said, okay, that's cool. I said, wow, I want to serve you. So here I am now. I'm in San Diego, California. I'm doing a lecture, and I'm talking about this to 250 graduating students. And this girl in front, she raises her hand. She says, well, Mr. Coleman, she said, well, I try to serve God. She said, but I'm not sure what my God-given talents are for sure. And I said, well, you need to know what your God-given talents are. I said, so let me paint a picture for you that God painted for me. Think of it this way. God has one great big huge toolbox, and that toolbox only has people in it. And each of those people are a tool, two tools, two God-given talents. So when he has a project he wants to do, he looks into that toolbox and he says, I need a pair of pliers and a hammer. I said, now, do you think he's going to reach in that toolbox and pick you up if you don't know you're a pair of pliers? Probably not. He loves you. He loves everybody in the toolbox equally. But if he's going to do a project, he's going to reach in there and get a hold of the person who knows they're a pair of pliers and probably have said to him repeatedly, thank you for making me a pair of pliers. Does this make sense?
Absolutely.
So he says, okay. She said, well, okay, Mr. Coleman. She says, what if you know you're a pair of pliers, but you know you're not the best pair of pliers in that box? And I said, it's really easy. When God reaches in there and gets a hold of you and picks you up, guess what? You just became the best pair of pliers in the world. And I said, that's what you have to have faith in. You have to understand that when you're in business. If you don't know what your talents are and you don't know what your employees' talents are, then you're missing the boat. And if they don't know what they are, find them to get those and know what those talents are. And have them put it on their forehead, on their bathroom mirror, have them put it on their cell phone, on their screensaver. Put those God-given talents, because if you don't wake up every day with it in mind, I want to serve you, God, with these God-given talents, then you're not hitting your mark. I used to play darts with my older brothers, and I got really good at hitting the bullseye regularly. And they asked me how I hit the bullseye all the time. And I said, because that's all I see when I throw the dart. I don't look at anything else. I block everything else out, and I only see that red dot. So when I throw, my brain connects to my arm, and I'm more likely to throw more red dots than I am anything else. I said, I figured that out. Wasn't rocket science, but it's the same exact principle. If you truly want to serve God, and I think most people do, I believe most of your listeners do, then you need to know what your purpose is in life. And to find your purpose, you have to use your God-given talents to serve God, and he will then give you your purpose. I'm living my purpose right now. I'm blessed. At 69 years old, I have more passion in my life than I've had in my entire life. You know why? Because God's telling me what my purpose is, and I work on it every day. So that brings me to, what am I doing today? Well, I'm working on a new mass transportation system across the United States. I could talk to you about that for hours, but it's a new first mass transportation system, and I figured out how to do it economically without any tax dollars, doing it all with private funds. We could do another podcast on that.
We will.
Yeah. The number one transportation company that worked on the Hyperloop has already approved the project, and we're getting ready to do some major stuff in one of the major states here in the United States as our prototype state. So that's one project I'm working on. Guess where I got that idea from?
Right.
It's funny, because when you want to serve God and you use your God-given talents, he just tells you like that. I wish somebody told me this back when I was in my 20s and 30s and 40s. Oh, my gosh. I wanted to serve God. And I'm not a guy that runs up and down the street carrying the Christian flag either. I'm just not. It's just not my nature. But these messages that I'm telling you right now, I do wave them around because God told me to. And so, know that you have your two God-given talents. Know what they are. Recite them to yourself every single day, because here's the deal. You're most valuable to the world when you emphasize the two gifts that God gave you. And if you're not conscious of those gifts, then how are you going to emphasize them every day? You know what that means? You're taking them for granted.
Right.
How bad is that? The greatest gift that God gave you as an individual beyond his own begotten son was that uniqueness that makes you, your nest. And that is those two God-given talents. And you need to be conscious of that, aware of it, and so does the people around you. And if you can spread that, and then to know that when God's got a project and he looks down in his toolbox, he's going to pick up the one that knows who they are. And he's going to pick up the one that says, God, use me. Please use me to serve you. Of course he's going to use that one. It's not rocket science. If I've got 3 kids and all 3 of them, the same scenario, one of them says, Dad, I know I'm really good at this, this, and this. If you could ever use me in any way, shape, or form, reach out and I'd love to help you. Guess which kid I'm going to call on more?
Right.
Of course I'm going to call on that kid. So the principle of that stays the same. It was actually, it was such an emotional thing for me to hear this and understand it. And I'm telling you, it works. These are golden nuggets that I tell you, they're simple principles that we just need to shift our thinking some, focus our time, because our time is so valuable to us. But just know it's your faith first, family second, time third, and relationships. Well, relationships is what really gets you what you need and want. It's what God wants. God wants us to connect with other fives, because magic happens. The Constitution of the United States happened because a bunch of fives got together. That's when greatness happens in our communities. One of the things that God shared with me is that fives today are sitting in the back seat of the car telling someone else to drive. That's not what he wants.
You're
He's
right.
supposed to get back in the front seat, get behind the driving wheel, and you drive that car. because
Yep.
guess who's supposed to be driving it? His fives. He called them his chosen people. I said, God, I can't call them chosen people. That won't work. And he said, well, they are. They're the ones I chose to lead the rest of the people. And I said, well, I got to call them something different. He said, you call them whatever you want to call them. You'll come up with a name. You're a marketing minded guy. You come up with something. And I said, well, how many of them is there? He said, well, roughly 5%. About 5% of the population are them. And he said, give or take, it varies a little bit, but he said pretty much 5%. So that's what I call the book. Focus on the five. It came from him, not from me. And it's just, and it makes sense when you think about it. I said, well, God, is this true with the animals too? He said, yep, every living thing. Every
Wow.
living thing, there's 5% that are fives. He said, show a pack of dogs. I guarantee there's going to be one dog who's the alpha dog that leads the rest. And he goes, and it was designed that way. He said, I made them that way. And he said, humans are no different. So I'm saying to you, if you are a five, you have an obligation to lead, to be a leader. And you know it. Down deep, you kind of know it. May not necessarily be the role you necessarily want. You're doing it with your podcast. Podcasts are great leadership roles. And so I admire that. And I think that it's important to get that word out. So I appreciate the fact that I've got a chance to have this platform and get to talk about it.
Well, first of all, I have to say, Ken, that I think you've had an amazing career. I think you're an amazing individual yourself. You're an accomplished author, and I'm excited to hear what else you've got to accomplish.
Well, let's see. Today I wrote songs. I wrote over 400 songs. I became a songwriter just a little over 2 years ago. And I decided that I had such passion for life. I wanted to write songs. So I'm right now writing songs for two of the biggest songwriters in the country. And I feel blessed to get to do that. And that's just a hobby. That's something I just get to do on the side because I love doing it. The writing of the books is something that I just feel like that every human being should do. All fives should write books. If you walk into Barnes and Noble tonight and you just walk in there and pick up any book, guess what it's written about? A five. Every time. They don't write about non-five. They only write about fives. That's who we want to read about. That's what the rest of the world wants to read about. And so we've just defined that. In the marketing world, they call them early adopters. What's an early adopter? Early adopter is the first one that's willing to take a risk to buy something. It's the first one that bought the Tesla. I got to go to the very first reunion of Tesla buyers, and they were all sitting in a room. And I realized I'm sitting here with a bunch of fives, extreme fives. And I thought, how cool is that? It's like I called the meeting, and I think you should have heard the conversation, the energy in the room talking about their Teslas, Well, why did I know for a fact they were all fives? Because who else would have bought a Tesla in the early days?
Right.
Only a risk taker, somebody who says all about the shiny object. I walked into a room one time, a restaurant down in Austin, Texas, and I walked in with 3 bankers and 2 investors. And I was talking to them about the principles of focus on the five. It's not been too many years ago. And one of them said, Ken, how do you spot a five quickly when you walk into a room? And I said, well, that's the second book I'm going to write. I said, talks in detail about how to meet a five quickly, how to walk into a room and spot them from across the room, just from hand gestures and the way they talk and the way they carry themselves and the way they look. You can spot a five quickly. And I said, and it's not the things you typically think. And they said, well, man, we'd love for you to prove your point. We're getting ready to go in this restaurant, prove it. Well, I just got through buying one of those new flip phones that flip open, and it was the first one that you could buy in Texas. I went and got it, and they're in Austin, and I had it in my pocket. And I'd just taken it out of the box 2 days before, because guess why? I'm a five. So I walked in the restaurant, and I grabbed the box in my car real quick, and I put the phone back in the box, and it was just a white box, and this flip phone went and slid inside of it. And I walked in the restaurant, and as I walked in the restaurant, I held the phone up high. These guys standing around me, and I said, hey, guys, in this box right here, I have the latest, greatest new technology in the state of Texas. And I went over and sat down and just shut up. Didn't say another word. We started ordering food. They all were looking at me kind of funny. And I said, well, that was kind of weird. And I said, well, we'll see. Over the next hour, I had 8 people in that room walk over to me and say, hey, can I see what you got?
Nice.
And with each one of them, I asked them, I said, what do you do for a living? Guess what? 6 of them were owners of companies.
Woo.
Point is that fives love shiny objects, and they got to know what it is. They can't help themselves. The rest of the people in the room were curious, but do you think they got up off their butts and come over and asked me? No. Fives will. Fives, it's the nature of fives. They can't help themselves. They got to go do. Most pro athletes, I met a guy one time in a restaurant, shook hands with him. We sat down. He said, I said, you're a five. He goes, how do you know I'm a five? You just met me. I said, well, I'm pretty certain you're a five. I said, you played for the Buffalo Bills and you were tackled, right? He goes, yeah. And I said, well, that tells me you're a five, most likely. And he goes, how does that tell you I'm a five? I said, well, when you played football in high school, I said, did you ever get knocked down? And he goes, a lot of times. I said, did you get back up? He goes, sure. I said, in the same play? He goes, yeah, made the tackle sometimes. And I said, that's not normal, buddy. That's not average. Most people, when they get knocked down, they say, well, that hurt. I think I'll stay down here on the ground for a couple seconds till I get back up again. I said, that's just the nature of humans. And I said, so when you're hiring employees for your many restaurants that you have now, he goes, yeah, I have quite a few. I said, I said, well, non-fives don't have restaurants. They don't take the risk to buy restaurants and open restaurants. I said, just not their nature. Fives do that. That's who the owners are. That's who I said, sometimes they're CEOs, almost all founders are by their nature. And I said, and God knew that. God knew there had to be a certain percentage of people that was that group, or our world would never move forward. It would just stay where it's at. And I said, so that's the early adopter. And I said, and I know you are. And he said, well, tell me a little bit more about me. I don't know how much time we got left. I'll give you a couple hints about fives. One of the things that's pretty magical about fives is fives have a rough time staying married because fives are not easy to live with. It's their nature. And then the reality is if I'm an overachiever and I wake up each day and I got to go and I got to do and I can't sit still and I got to do, it kind of gets to be rough to live with. And they like to take some risks. It's like, honey, we're going to take some money from the bank account. We're going to do this. And you okay with that? And she's like, well, okay, this time. And the second time, it's like, we're going to do it again. Yeah, let's do it again. The third time, it's like, I've had enough of this. I'm out of here.
Right.
Probably explains why I'm single today. But the reality is being with a five is not easy. And it's just tough. And there's another reason why it's tough is because fives, by their nature, I have found, need to be loved more than the average person. Now, why is that? That's the fuel that feeds them. They need to be loved. See, they have faith. And because they have faith, they understand the principles of love. And so on a daily basis in the real world, they've got to have that connection with people. I'm just telling you that the best connection for a five is other fives. It's not the significant other. It's God and other fives. That's what will fuel a five more than anything else. And the relationship's great. If you can make that relationships work, that's fantastic. But you'll find that it's very difficult for a five. It's just the nature of, and it's in my books. It talks about that. It talks about a lot of the things that fives have to deal with. Everybody looks at a five and thinks they're nuts and crazy because they are. I mean, they just are. And they were designed that way, to take risk. I mean, I told that same football player, I said, when you got out of high school, I said, you went to college. I said, did you get knocked down and get back up again, even though the players got bigger? He said, oh, yeah. He said, there's a number of times I got knocked down twice and got back up again. I said, guess why you went on to pro? I said, see, fives don't quit. It's not in their nature. Fives don't ever see an obstacle as being an obstacle. An obstacle to a five just is a challenge that they're going to learn from. In fact, most fives look at challenges as more rewarding than the winning because they got to where they could win because of the challenges. And they didn't quit. They didn't give up on them.
Right.
So that's a different way of thinking than 95% of the population. 95% of the population says, wow, the burner on that stove's hot, so I'm never going to touch the stove again while it's on. No, you know what five will do? They'll figure out a way to create a mitt that you can actually touch the stove with, and so you can go on and do it.
Right.
Because they think differently. Their attitude on it is, let's solve that problem. I know it burns, but I'll figure out how to touch it still. You're not going to stop me. One time in high school, this is a fun little story. I was in high school, and my coach kept wanting me to go out for track. And I said, Coach, I can't run worth a darn. He said, well, Kenny, I still want you to go out for track. And I said, okay, I'll go out for track. I said, but I'm telling you, I can't run. So the first day I would go out up on top of the track. And there's me and 5 other guys, and he's got hurdles set up. I didn't know what hurdles were. And he goes, okay, guys, we're going to run the hurdles. You're going to be my hurdlers. I thought, well, hopefully I don't have to run real fast. And so he goes, you guys all line up. And there was 6 sets of hurdles. And he said, you guys all line up. And he said, here's what you're supposed to do. Go from point A to point B as fast as you can, but you got to go over these hurdles to do it. He says, just that simple. He said, the first one to the finish line wins. So I'm standing there, I'm thinking about that, and whistle goes off, and I took off, and I just put a foot in the middle of every single one of those and ran right over them. And I was the first one across the finish line. The rest of the guys were stumbling over them, fell over 2 or 3 of them. I was the first one across the finish line. It was the last time I ever crossed the finish line first, but I did that time. Years later, the coach walks into my real estate office to buy a house from me. And I'm in the car with him, and I'm driving around. I said, Coach, I'll never forget this. You made me the captain of the team, and I'm thinking I'm the slowest guy on the team. Why did you make me captain of the team? He said, Ken, when all of you lined up, he said, and I'll never forget this. He said, and I was telling you what you got to do. He said, you was the only guy looking at the finish line. The other 5 were all looking at the hurdles. And I said, But now I've learned that's what a 5 does. See, a 5 says, okay, give me the rules. Tell me what I'm at. What's my goal? And then I'm just going to look at the goal And the hurdles are just hurdles.
Right.
They're just things in my way. I'll figure out how to do that. And he said, and you did. You put a foot in every single one of them, went right over the top of them. He said, now, granted, that wasn't going to work in a race. He goes, but based on what I told you, he goes, you got to cross the finish line first. He said, so I figured you was the best coach. And he said that you became the captain of the team. So I learned from that, many other things like that over the years. But I made it as a 5. That's one of God's given talents that he gave me, was the ability to study people and to learn from them. And now he's telling me, give that back to people, and especially 5s. So that's why I spend most of my time focused on 5s, because if I want to make the most impact in this world, and guess who goes to non-for-profit events a lot?
5s.
High concentration of them.
Yeah.
So if you want to meet 5s tonight or tomorrow, go to a non-for-profit event in your town. And here's the thing. You don't have to give money. They don't know whether you gave money or not. Volunteer. Go there and if you got some extra money, as the years went by, I was making money and I could give money. But, in the beginning, I helped them set up tables, I signs or whatever they needed done. And guess who I was working with? I was working with Johnny Morris's wife that owned Bass Pro. I was working with Tim O'Reilly's spouse who owns O'Reilly Automotive. I was rubbing elbows with the person that mattered the most in their life.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing.
It's a simple formula, but let me tell you, buddy, it works. And it's very, very valuable to your listeners.
Ken, you have been awesome. I want to thank you so much. I feel like there are so many morsels that can come out of this podcast. I could do shorts forever on just this one podcast. And I'm excited to do a follow-up with you. Everybody go out and check out the book, Focus on the 5. And obviously, when the next one comes out, I want to take a look at that one as well. Thank you for watching another episode of Revenue Playbook Chronicles. If you liked our content, please share, subscribe, comment, whatever button you have down there. Please push it and be on the lookout for Mr. Ken Coleman for some more. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.